The Echorec is a fantastic sounding analog delay full of character and personality. It's based on the old Benson Echorec that featured 4 reed heads, and that gives it a lot of unique flavor that we're going to explore. Now, in this video, I want to kind of look at how the controls work in a clinical way, and then we'll put it to work on our mixes we've been using throughout the series in the next video. So the control panel, I'm not going to rehash it again. It's everything you know: redo, presets, save as, snapshots. And in here, there's an option for disabling static noise, which gives it a sense of realism. When you're cranking extreme levels, you'll hear a bit of the noise that the analog machine emulated, so you can optionally turn that on or off. Now we've got a dry wet mix control, and if you use this as an insert on a track, you're generally going to only dial in a little bit of the wet signal. If you're using it on a send return setup on a bus, you want to have the wet all the way up, and then you dial how much you want arriving here via the send knob. Right now, for this example, I have it directly inserted on a roads track, so I want the dry signal with just a little bit of wet blended in. And I also should point out there's an on-off switch here when we can turn the entire machine off and then just use the drive control to get some nice saturation from this unit. Now, the idea with the Echorec is that it consists of a writing head that writes on a magnetic disc, and then there's 4 offset read heads that read from the same disc. That's the hardware. So each head is responsible for a repetition, and it can be turned on or off independently when we use this delay setting. And as I move this, you'll see the heads light up briefly, indicating which heads are used. So the idea is that these generate different rhythmic figures, like an 8th and 2/16, or 2/16 and an 8, and simple variations based on 3 or 4 different repeats that are generated. And this is independent from the disk speed control. Now here we can sync this to host, and we get typical musical values that we're used to working with in delay units, but this works kind of as an offset from this. And of course, when we're in free mode, you can adjust it freely, and you can tap. And if you're in host sync and start tapping, it'll take it out of sync mode, and you just generate the speed based on the speed with which you're tapping. Now we have feedback over here, and this interacts with the mode switches. So when we're in rip or swell mode over here, the feedback controls the amount of the output signal fed back into the input circuit. So basically it controls the number of repetitions. And when you get above a certain amount here, when you're in higher values, it becomes self-oscillating, and lower you can control the amount of repeats a little more easily. So here we have rip mode, which is a classic feedback type of delay where the sound of each playback head is fed back to the input according to what we have set here. So the rhythm that's generated here will get fed back in. And that's kind of the classic delay effect we're used to working with. Now, when we go into swell mode, it's similar, except that the overall output is the sum of all 4 of the read heads, independent from what's generated from here. So as a result, it creates a lot of reflections and echoes, and this can kind of emulate the sound of a space in a small room, like early reflections, because we get a lot of rapidly oscillating repeats. We'll explore it in a moment. Now, we also have some other controls here. Stereo drift is interesting. It's only available in stereo versions of this, and it allows us to create a slight difference in delay time between the left and right channels. So it'll create a bit of a drift to the left or the right. And it's great to widen a mono recording. So you can stick a mono file on a stereo track and a stereo instance of this and get a nice widening effect. We can also, like with the hardware, use this to break the disk speed and kind of modulate the speed and get a bit of a tape stop effect by clicking with the mouse. And we'll see it, we'll hear it in a moment, but you can see as you click, and if you're closer to the outer edge, there's a greater amount of the modulation effect versus clicking higher in, but you can get some interesting effects that way. We have a tone control, which is basically high and low pass filtering. We can get used good or mint quality of the delay unit. It just basically adds grit and distortion and breakdown of the circuits, and it can be interesting getting dirty effects with that. And we have drive to introduce saturation. So I'm going to play you a Rhodes right now, playing very strict half notes. I'm going to leave this off for the moment, and you'll hear it with a click, so you get a sense of the time. Let's bring the feedback all the way down. So it's a very tight delay. There's an eighth note. So this first one, you see it's this playhead. It's a 16th. An eighth note. Third one is the third 16th. There we got a quarter note delay, 4/16. So those are the basic patterns. And now we get combinations. There's 2 eighth notes. There's an eighth and 2/16. Another variation. 2/16 arrest and then the last 16ths. So you hear the rhythms that are generated. Now let's go through that with swell mode. So the output is the sum of all four. So you hear how it's quick reflections, and if I dial up feedback, it's almost like a sense of space. So let's bring that down. Go back to rip. Here's like a dotted eighth. And if I bring up the feedback, we'll hear additional repetitions of that delay that's generated. So it can get a bit sloppy. Very sloppy like that. Let's go back here. It's a typical kind of tempo sync based delay. Now this interacts with the speed here. Let's say I set this to dotted quarters. So these playhead positions become offsets of the value we have set there. Now watch what happens when I click here. We get that pitch modulation. There it's very dramatic. Here it's more like wound flutter. We can do some filtering. Thinner sound. Darker. Distort it. There we hear the longer lingering echoes. And here we're only going to get the one repeat. The feedback doesn't do anything. Used to get a really dirty sound. Cleaner. A bit of drift between the two channels. This is a stereo sound, so it's not as dramatic as on a mono type of sound. And I can go tap to create my own rhythm. Have an interesting effect. Or we can just type our own values or drag our own values in. And you can modulate or automate this, and you get that pitch modulation effect. So lots of interesting possibilities, and then just a volume offset at the end. Next video, we're going to put this to work on the tracks we've been using.